Just before we get going with the show, it's a terrific one today. We're digging into nutrition and fueling for endurance athletes, particularly as we march into race season. We welcome Megan Foley of the Fuelin team. If you'd like to continue the conversation around your nutritional journey, and then head to Purple Patch Fitness, go up to the virtual services. We'll put the link in the show note and you can read everything about Fuelin and their services. It's our most trusted partner around fueling and nutrition for endurance athletes. You can also reach out directly to their team. Just mention that you heard about it on this podcast. They'll take great care of you. info@fuelin.com. And with a broader perspective, if you'd like to talk about your performance journey, and you'd like to set up a complimentary consultation with us, we would be happy. And it will be absolutely free, both in terms of pressure and, of course, finances, for us to execute a needs assessment, to have a conversation with you about your performance journey and how we might be able to help. All you need to do is head to purplepatchfitness.com/coaching consult. If you're having troubles with that, well, you can always email us as well, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We'll set up a call. We'll see how we're a fit. And if nothing else, make sure that you leave with a clear path of what you need to do to go and be successful in your performance journey. All right, enjoy the show. I'm Matt Dixon, and welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. The mission of Purple Patch is to empower and educate every human being to reach their athletic potential. Through the lens of athletic potential, you reach your human potential. The purpose of this podcast is to help time-starved people everywhere integrate sport into life. And welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast. As ever, your host, Matt Dixon. And today, it's a cracker. We get to welcome back Fuelin. We've had Scott Tyndall on the show many times, but we're actually broadening our perspective. Today, we get to welcome Megan Foley to the team. Megan is an internationally recognized registered dietitian. She's based in Utah. She's a professional athlete. She has extensive experience all the way from Olympic-level athletes to first-timers looking to unlock their performance recipe, pardon the pun, along the nutrition journey. She is a master of taking and filtering incredibly complex situations and challenges and filtering it down into simple and actionable. She's a key part of the Fuelin team, and she's a wonderful resource for us. In today's show, we dig into a lot around nutrition and fueling. We wanted to anchor the premise today around the fact that it's spring, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. We're emerging into race season, and we want to unpack some of the mistakes that we see that endurance athletes make, create some strategic advantages so that you can not just fuel your training, but get performance ready. We're going to discuss race weight, the role of sleep as it applies to your body composition goals, and creating a strategic plan for you so that you can show up on race day ready to implement the best fueling and hydration program for you to be successful. We even dig into a little bit of race week pitfalls and, of course, strategies to ensure that you don't mess it up near the end and you get everything out of your hard work. Megan's terrific. It's the first time on a show. She's a great part of the Fuelin team. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you'd like to reach out and discuss with Megan anything more about your performance journey, just feel free to reach out. info@fuelin.com. I'm sure that she or the team are going to be welcoming to set up a little quick consultation or chat or even an email dialogue to answer some of your questions and see how you can become a part of the Fuelin journey. Of course, always mention that you heard about the team on this show. They'll take special care of you. And so, without further ado, here it is, Nutrition, Megan Foley, an absolutely terrific conversation that I thoroughly enjoyed and I think that you're going to find really, really useful. It is all in today's meat and potatoes. All right, it is the meat and potatoes. And I get to welcome to the Purple Patch Podcast for the very first time, Megan. Nice to have you here. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get in this conversation.
we're going to dig into everything time appropriate around fueling and nutrition for athletes. And you are flying the flag for Fuelin. It is so you're not the first Fuelin representative on the Purple Patch podcast. The one and only Scott Tyndall has been on many times before, but the rumor is you're much of an upgrade over that young gentleman. So we're excited to fasten the seatbelt and see where it goes.
I'll pass that information along to him for sure. Just let him know that he's been replaced.
He has been replaced. He has very much been replaced. So the catalyst for the conversation was actually a a meeting or a session that you did with the Purple Patch athletes with senior coach Nancy Clark. And it was received so well. We got so much feedback on how valuable it was that we thought, let's replicate the bones of it, the framework of it, but let's do this as a part of the Purple Patch podcast, so enabling to educate athletes outside of the Purple Patch ecosystem. And it's particularly timely now for us as race season is here. North America, obviously, and the more broad race season, it's really charging up. We've already had, and people's real attention is here. The weather is warming up, and so we start to shift mindset a little bit, not just in a training standpoint, but obviously in a fueling and nutrition standpoint. It's really important for athletes to get it right before they pay the price. And so I always see as a coach, just giving us grounding here, athletes start to say, okay, X in the calendar, it starts to get serious, but they often leave the nutritional shifts behind that we want to do. So I want to draw on your expertise to try and have athletes come along for the journey and not just emphasize training, but also really think about what needs to shift now. What do they need to think about in terms of fueling, in terms of daily hydration, as well as nutrition? So that's the big gear. So are you ready to rock and roll? And we'll fasten your seatbelts and see where this takes
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Let's get into it. I One thing I really appreciate about Purple Patch and listening to some of your previous podcasts is you have a focus for each quarter that you kind of talk athletes through. And I think nutrition
Mm,
is really the same, right? We are going to be periodizing our nutrition across the year in the same way that we are periodizing our training. And that's really important, right? It's not going to be the same focus in December that it is in April when we're getting ready for a race. And that nutrition aspect always needs to match what's happening in training, right? So that
mhm.
carbohydrate piece in particular, as your training sessions increase in duration, as your training sessions increase in intensity, you really need to scale that carbohydrate intake along with that. Otherwise, there's going to be this mismatch that happens, and that's where a lot of that error seems to occur for folks.
It it's interesting, and I haven't even asked you a specific question yet, but we're already into it, which is fantastic. But the last conversation that I had on nutrition with Scott, he said something actually really profound, and this was in off season, profound for me, where it really helped establish a mindset. And I'm gonna share this with you now and lead into a question. He talked about in off season saying this is where you want to get the fundamentals right, where you're really building high quality nutrition almost outside of athletic demands. So really building a base of fantastic daily protein intake, tons of fiber and vegetables, etc. And then he talked about throttling your carbohydrates up as training load increases, but never losing sight of foundationally, you are still got this bedrock of really high quality nutrition. And that was a really great perspective for me because I see of a lot of athletes forget that we are still human beings that want this foundation of high quality nutrition and just think in terms of fueling. So it was a really nice way in off season to think about it in terms. What I want to ask you now, okay, great. With that context, I see consistently around this time, going into spring, things start to get serious, athletes making mistakes. So, can you share from your perspective, what's some of the common mistakes around this time as training heats up, racing demands start to loom into the close future? What are some of the mistakes that you see athletes make?
I think the big one that we come across most frequently is athletes see this race countdown and training peaks come up, right? And maybe
Mhm.
3 weeks, 2 weeks till race day, and they think, "I'm not at race weight yet," and that causes them a lot of stress. And so, because they're feeling these emotions, maybe it's just nerves and anxiety about the race kind of compounding it, but the focus almost shifts from performance to race weight, and those 2 concepts are not the same, right? Like, having a good performance on race day is not tied to a single number on the scale, right? I often like to tell people, we don't weigh athletes when they cross the finish line to determine their race order. So, while that may be a metric that has some impact on performance, it's not the only metric that has impact on performance, right? Like, so does your bike fit, so does your mental fortitude, so does your fueling. And so putting so much emphasis on this weight number can be actually a performance detriment because we're not taking into account all of these other areas where you could actually get a greater return on your investment, right? So
Mhm.
it's that focus on weight instead of nailing the training sessions, instead of recovering from those training sessions, and and that oftentimes is what we see athletes, go through and have these pitfalls in those last couple of weeks prior to the races starting.
Can I do a little almost fake case study of this? Because I want to dig into the consequence of this. And let's say that somebody is 2 months out of their
Mhm.
race, 6 weeks out of the race, and they see on the scale, make it up 150 pounds. They decide from maybe some algorithm elsewhere, so maybe that's where they felt best when they were 10 years ago, that 145 is the magic number. That's going to shift their behavior and their relationship with fueling and nutrition. If they've decided over the next month, if I can drop a few pounds, then I should be better. Can you break out some of the consequences that you tend to see as a nutritionist when an athlete takes that mindset? Because we've all been
Yeah.
there. We know what that's like. It's very, very common, but it comes with consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to look at the performance metrics around it too when we're entering race season. I mean, typically in this 2 month period prior to a race beginning, your training is getting more intense. Maybe you're doing more tempo, more threshold, more VO2 max sessions. And how I like to phrase this to athletes is, you can never get 100% out of yourself if you are only giving yourself 85%, right? So, like, if you're operating in that
Hmm.
deficit consistently, there's a mismatch occurring there. And so, oftentimes, we'll see, maybe those recovery pieces that are impacted initially. So, sleep getting impaired, more muscle soreness happening, and just maybe consistently kind of feeling sore and achy, decreases in motivation that come in with training, right? Maybe you were initially super ramped for this race, and now all of a sudden it's like, I have to drag myself into training every day. Um, Frequent injuries or illness that pop up more frequently. All of these things are unfortunately pretty common if athletes are trying to undergo a pretty serious deficit while also doing this really heavy training load. And again, that may not provide the performance benefit that that athlete is looking for.
Yeah. Because they might be seeing a scale dropping, but what they're actually losing as well is resilience and adaptations and ultimately readiness, yeah?
Exactly.
Like health and vibrancy. W do beyond the athlete that is focused on the scale, I'm assuming there's also the challenge of as you do ramp up demands, even if somebody is capped on hours per week, arbitrarily, someone trains 12 hours a week, quite often the demands and the intensity of the training sessions increases right now. Do you see when you're working with athletes on a nutrition front that they leave nutrition behind a little bit? So, in other words, they throttle up, but they don't change their nutrition. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as the intensity of training increases, so does the energy expenditure from that training, right? You're just simply burning more calories. And so what happens is athletes are maybe not fueling these sessions in the way that they should. And so
Hmm.
they're creating, large deficits within the training sessions themselves. Or simply they're just not eating enough outside of that activity to support what they're doing. You're only able to sustain that deficit that you're creating for so long before your body's going to compensate for that. So we see that pretty typically. And then the other side of that is, especially for more of these athletes that are maybe just getting into sport, they see that the nutrition is the reward for training, right? They're like, oh, I did
Yeah.
my 2 hour bike. I'm going to go eat a double cheeseburger and a milkshake and then, follow it up with something else, right? And there's nothing wrong with those foods, but we're
Mm.
not, we're not fueling the work itself, allowing our bodies to actually do the work in the way that it was supposed to be done, and then kind of treating nutrition as the afterthought or the reward for training instead of it being the fuel that allows you to do the training correctly.
Mhm. The I when I first started coaching and there were so many athletes that were under fueling, and by the way, that was my background, and I ended my professional triathlon career ended in chronic fatigue, and I was certainly grossly under fueled on a day-to-day basis and had some very detrimental impact of that. One of the things I always talked to athletes about was the absolutely critical habit or practice of post-workout fueling and ensuring that every single workout you're following. Do you still recommend that as a practice for every athlete? Number one, and number two, is there any rule of thumb or gauge to help an athlete? Like, what's the defining lens that an athlete, as their training is throttling up over, where they can keep track? And I don't necessarily mean measuring it, but they can keep track and shift their behaviors where they know that they're getting enough calories and the right type of calories to support their training.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to recovery nutrition specifically, I have 5 R's that I like to recover to make it simple
Mm,
for athletes. So 4 of them are nutrition related, and then the fifth is not, but it's still a non-negotiable when it comes to actually getting that full adaptation that we're looking for.
mm,
So number 1 is replenishing muscle glycogen after a session, right? So your body's preferred energy source during moderate to high intensity activity is going to be carbohydrates. So we need to make sure that
yeah,
we're providing that afterwards to help replenish those glycogen stores. We need to repair the muscle damage that's occurred during training sessions. So those tiny micro muscle tears, we're going to do that with protein. Now, do you need protein immediately post training? I think that's been debunked at this point that the timing does not matter as much as the total dose. But I like to see it as this is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity to start that
mhm,
repair process a little bit more quickly. So, a good idea to include it here. The third is going to be rehydrating. So, as we're
mhm,
exercising, we're sweating, we need to replace those fluid losses that we had. Even if you were, you know, hydrating well during a training session, you're probably still a bit more dehydrated than you were when you started.
yeah,
The fourth being helping to reinforce your immune system. So, endurance athletes in particular are typically more likely to experience upper respiratory infections. And so, if we can
mm,
add some additional antioxidants, some additional polyphenols from our fruits and vegetables, that's going to provide some benefit. So, those are the four nutritional related R's. And then the fifth, which is often the hardest for people who also work full time jobs or have really busy schedules, is just rest, right? So, getting
yeah,
enough sleep at night, having those periods of downtime, you can only train as hard as you can recover. So without that piece, it's going to be really difficult to make significant improvements. So if we're nailing all five of those pieces post training, we're in a pretty good spot. So, the total amount of food that an athlete needs is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors, right? It's going to be dependent on their just needs in general, the activity that they just did. If you're looking for more specific advice on that, definitely Fuelin can help, right? We give those specific amounts to
Yeah.
athletes to ensure they're doing it properly. But even something as simple as a smoothie, right? That's going to cover all four of
Hmm.
those pieces: the carbs, the protein, the fluids, the fruits and vegetables, right? You know, something like that post training can be a really great option. Or if you have the ability to have a meal directly post training, that's another way to really simply make sure that you're getting in all those pieces. A well balanced meal is going to contain some carbs, it's going to contain some protein, it's going to have some
Hmm.
color, right? So, um, you know, just those little tips to make sure that we're getting in those nutrients immediately post training is going to allow athletes to train more frequently and then also get that full time recovery before their next training session starts, right? If we're having something immediately post session, you now have all of that larger time window before the next one starts.
Hmm. I'll say as a coach to your comment earlier around the research of the timing of protein. The one thing that I have understood over time is ensuring that people can adhere to things in a really structured way liberates. So, in many ways, it's sort of like the research for me as a coach is slightly irrelevant. If I can get people to take action, I know that that's an ingrained habit that they're putting something in the mouth. So, combine the protein and carbohydrate, it's a critical nature because I know it's then going to happen, as it were, versus when people are particularly busy, and a lot of athletes are, whether they're you know, running around chasing kids or leading an organization, it's so often that that doesn't occur. So having an anchor point, it's a little bit like, okay, this is a ritual, very, very similar to waking up in the morning and the first thing you do is consume a liter of water because you know it's going to happen and it won't happen at 9 a.m. when you're in the middle of a meeting, for example. So there's a sort of that side of it. I I want to go on a tangent and ask actually two questions. I'm going to ask this first, just on the various R's that you went through. You talked about rest, and this one is really important because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of viewing training and nutrition and sleep as completely independent from each other, mutually exclusive. I'd love you to just explore a little bit and dig into a little bit more around sleep and the interaction, particularly for people that are either thinking about performance gains or body composition shifts. And I'll do a leading statement here that you can debunk. It's sort of there is limited value on you doing a great job on your nutrition and fueling if your sleep is in the absolute toilet because the stress is going to have such an impact that your body can't yield the benefits here. So that's a sort of deliberate leading statement. Debunk me or give me your thoughts on that because I want you to just dig into the interaction of sleep and stress and cortisol and everything else that we're managing in the day as it relates to nutrition.
Yeah, yeah, it's I think we can't look at these points in isolation, right? They're all going to be
Mhm.
interrelated to each other. And I'll take the perspective of weight loss or calorie deficits first, right? So I like to think of a calorie deficit as a stress on the body.
Yep.
I don't think that we can argue that there's any other way around that. I would also argue that training is a stress, right? That we're actually wanting stress in training so that we can get the adaptation from it. Now,
Yeah.
if we are also not sleeping enough at night, if you're only getting 5, 6 hours of sleep, that's an additional stress. And so athletes maybe have these large goals, and we know that some stress is required for growth. But if we have stress in all of these different areas, it's too much. It's compounding effects of these of training, of nutrition, of sleep. And so athletes are probably unable to recover from that and get the benefits that they're actually after. So, I think we can't, as I mentioned, can't address one without looking at the others. They're all going to have an interplay on each other. And when it comes to performance, like I said earlier, when we are looking at trying to improve performance for an athlete, we have to look at where do we get the area of greatest return. And
Mhm.
sometimes that may be doing more training, but sometimes that may be getting more recovery from sleeping enough at night, or maybe that is from improving your nutrition and making sure that you're adequately fueled during your sessions. So, we can't pick apart these certain pieces of an athlete and say we're only going to focus on this one thing when everything is going to be interrelated to each other.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. Can you dig into fueling a little bit and how you manage this? I think one of the common challenges for athletes is understanding how they should fuel their body relative to what type of session you're is. So you have a really easy 40-minute jog. You have a very high intensity bike. You have an over duration bike with a runoff. Fueling that does a fantastic job of not creating a rigid spreadsheet where suddenly you have to go out and find sardines and a specific type of tortilla to go with that, etc. There's a lot of flex in there, but it's a really good gauge that whether you're walking into a restaurant or a grocery store or your kitchen, you know what you need to do for yourself to fuel your body. Can you just give a quick summary of how you architect that as an organization?
Yeah. So what we do is we look at an athlete's anthropometrics first, and then we also
Mm,
take into account their workouts that they're doing. So we integrate with Training Peaks, with Final Surge, with Humango, and we read their training sessions to determine what their nutrition needs are, and then we give them exactly what they should have for every meal, every snack, and every workout. And when I say exactly what they should have, I mean macronutrient wise. We're never giving specific food examples that, like you said, you need to eat sardines and I don't know, a high fiber tortilla. That doesn't actually sound very delicious. I'm not sure. I'm not sure anyone.
Does
Yeah,
not, does
I'm not sure how many
it?
athletes would actually follow that meal plan if we gave it to them. Um, but the idea is to remove the guesswork around nutrition, right? And the the mental space that it takes to know, am I fueling effectively? So we're taking that off of an athlete's plate, so to speak, and allowing them to just focus on other pieces of their training. So at the beginning of the year, we actually upgraded our Fuelin V2 engine and we made it even more specific. So now we take into account more
Mm.
metrics than we did previously. We can look at an athlete's FTP. We can look at their run threshold speed, their swim threshold speed to better estimate their energy expenditure during sessions. We look at their physical activity level outside of training because
Oh, interesting.
someone
Yeah.
who works an office job is going to have a very different energy needs than someone who's a construction worker, for example. And so taking
Mm.
that more into account. And then also, we have estimated an athlete's basal metabolic rate or RMR, but if they have lab work that they've done to have this measured, they can input that directly into our system just to make those recommendations more specific to them. So the purpose is for it to be really simple, really easy. And if an athlete is looking for specific recommendations of what to eat, right? We can give them examples. They can input and say, I have these items in my fridge or in my pantry, and we will create recipe ideas for them using the ingredients they already have in their house. So just really trying to make nutrition easy and simple for folks.
Yeah, because it's not a one of the most important experiences that the athletes that I have that are on the program, and I should be clear, we're not doing an advertorial for Fuel in here, but it's a really important part of it. It's not a cage. In other words, it's not incredibly restrictive. And in addition to that, it's also not one of these things where you're building an unhealthy relationship with food, where you're counting every single calorie and you're thinking, okay, I need to weigh every gram of food that I'm going to consume. But it's really creating these guardrails and sort of frameworks to empower an athlete and a person to gain control and to gain confidence that they're putting the right thing in their body and ultimately go on that journey to in many ways build really positive habits. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, it reminds me, I mean, I worked as a dietitian for years before I joined Fuelin, and everyone always wants a meal plan, right? They're like, just tell me exactly what
Yeah.
to eat and when to eat it.
Yeah.
And so I would spend so much time making these things for folks and give it to them. And not a single person actually followed it, right? Like
Yeah.
there's something that's lost between the desire and then actually the execution there. And so, like you said, it's a guideline for athletes to say,
Mhm.
here are some ideas of what you could have, but you will always have the choice over what foods you want to consume and not consume. And again, it's a way to fuel your goals, to allow you to achieve what you want, whether it's a health outcome or whether it's a sports performance outcome. And when it comes to nutrition, a lot of people, when they maybe first have this goal of weight loss or sports performance or whatever it might be, they approach it from a place of restriction or like fear, even like I need to
Yeah.
be at this in order to do well in this race, right? Like I need to be 10 pounds less or whatever
Yeah.
it is, instead of having the perspective of, okay, well, if I eat this way, this will allow me to achieve XYZ, or approaching it with the curiosity of, oh, okay, I'm trying to make these dietary changes. How do I make this fun and exciting and something that is sustainable, right? Because I think that's a piece that's often missed too is how do I make nutrition fun and support my needs and also help me to achieve these goals? And so I think Fuelin does a really good job of supporting athletes in that way.
I think that what you said there is probably the most important thing through a coaching lens of for any athlete when they think about what they're putting in their body. I'm just going to put my coaching hat on now. They have a goal. It should be something that scares them a little bit because that's how we get to growth. And yet, with commitment and follow through, they can achieve it. That's a perfect goal for me in an athletic sense. The defining relationship with fueling and nutrition is not something that is limiting and
Yes.
restrictive and um, and driving towards less. It is the fuel to drive you onto that goal. And that's the first thing, because if you can build success, build resilience, build control, feel vibrant, have energy, show up consistently, not only are you much more likely to achieve your goal, you're going to have more energy, enjoy it more. And quite often, the byproduct of that, and again, you give me your thoughts on this, is that people's body composition and people's energy and people's health improves as almost a byproduct because we found the recipe, as it were. But the first thing is really avoiding, and let's come back to Fuel In because we're not really talking about the product per se. I'm going to sign up for Fuel In because I need to restrict, I need to limit, but instead it's like I need to fuel. And that first, if we start with that, I've seen success be so much better for the athlete. It's really incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think mindset has mindset is so important in any goal that you achieve, but especially in
Yeah.
nutrition, right? I mean, even those athletes who are maybe aiming to lose weight, and so there is a calorie deficit that needs to be established in order for that to happen. Approaching it from the perspective of, okay, well, what can I add to my meals to make this meet my goals? Instead of, oh, I can't have this. I need to avoid this. And this dessert is now off the table forever, right? Like it's how can we add volume to this plate to make it more satiating? Or how do we add enough protein so that, you feel full and satisfied by your meals? I think it should always be from the perspective of how can I make this better? How can I make this more, instead of, well, I can't have this. I need to stop doing this. And, it's that restriction mindset that really doesn't suit folks. And it's really hard to do that sustainably.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great. Well, it's springtime, as we talked about it, and that means it's racing time. So I want to get onto some actionable stuff. I want to start to drive race fuel strategy and helping people I've heard it all before of people saying nutrition is the fourth discipline. And since we believe at strength training so much at Purple Patch, we're going to call it the fifth discipline here: swim, bike, run, strength, and nutrition. But in any event, how should athletes go about training race fueling and their gut for it, which of course more modern research has understood that we can train our gut. What's your strategy for people that are racing? How should they set out their stall so that they can be successful, that on race day they know what they're going to do, they can execute it, and it has the impact that we want? The floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think number one is to start now, right? I think
Mm.
now is the perfect time to start practicing in session fueling. You know, I think if we are planning to take on nutrition in a race, we need to train for that in the same way that we train for swimming, biking, and running, right? It's not something that we can
Mhm.
just expect to do on race day and expect it to go well. But along with that, we need to start where we currently are. So, if you are an athlete who maybe is not accustomed to taking on fuel during sessions, it's probably not going to be in your best interest to jump immediately into 100 grams of carb per hour and expect that to go well, right? So, it needs to be a gradual increase. Again, the same way that we treat training, we're going to treat nutrition as well. And remember that the stomach is a muscle. So while something may be a little bit uncomfortable at first, maybe taking on 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour is uncomfortable at first. It doesn't mean that it's going to be uncomfortable forever. And so typically it takes anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks of dedicated training, gut training, in order to see those improvements happen. So those small gradual increases over time, at least having that 8 to 12 weeks of practice and tracking how it's going. Honestly, like keeping a record
Yeah.
of what you've done in training and how well it's working for you. Are you experiencing any sort of GI distress during or excess fullness? Can we track those symptoms over time and make sure that they're trending in the right direction? That's going to be super important. Have you measured how much fluid you're losing over a training session, right? So determining an athlete's sweat rate is going to be important because it allows us to better understand what their fluid needs are going to be for future training sessions and for races. Next piece would probably be identifying the products that you want to use during your race, right? So not just doing, whatever's under your kitchen sink, which I've been guilty of, but if we're if
Mm.
we're really dedicating a period of time to training the gut and getting ready for a race, we probably need to pick some products that we would like to use on race day. And if you plan on using what's available on course, that's a what you probably want to be practicing with as well, and then using the tools that are available to you, right? So if you are using a Garmin bike computer, maybe having some sort of alerts or notifications to remind you to fuel during sessions, writing those training peaks notes to your coach to let them know what you're doing and how it's going is going to be important too, just to make sure that you're not alone in this process, right? So you have someone there to
Mhm.
kind of help guide you and benefit, you know the the goals that you're trying to achieve.
And is there the two follow-up questions for it? Across any landscape of a week, and we work with a lot of very busy athletes that maybe only have 45 or 60 minutes to train most weekdays. Then on the weekend, they get to do the larger sessions that maybe mimic race-specific sessions. They might go out on the bike for 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on their distance, running off the bike quite often. Do you recommend aiming to train the gut in every single session that they're doing, or are you highlighting more the sessions that mimic race duration, longer duration? What's the recipe for that?
Yeah, so when it comes to fueling sessions, fuel is primarily going to be driven by the intensity and the duration of that training session, right? So, from a physiological perspective, is there a need to fuel or practice refueling for 45-minute sessions? Probably not. However, there could be a benefit to gut training to maybe still having your small pre-workout snack close to the start of that
Mhm.
training session, right? That's going to be a benefit to those athletes, even if that session is shorter. But we really want to especially focus on those longer duration weekend sessions and really using those opportunities to practice race fueling. So, as I mentioned, duration and intensity are those two pieces that we really look at when it comes to um, the need for in session fueling to be there. So making sure that you're gradually building up to what you want to do at a race for those longer sessions is going to be necessary. Um, and I would say to athletes, talking with your coach, having some sort of, training plan in place to where you can continuously week over week do some of those longer training sessions that are maybe at a little bit higher intensity so that you have the expenditure drive to take on higher amounts of fuel.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I often, as a coach, designate them as simulators, if nothing else, to have the athlete signal to say, hey, this should be, for example, on your TT bike more, the intervals in that are going to be similar to race intensity or maybe even above. And that's okay if you're doing that. And you should also be thinking about your fueling and everything else because it's a rehearsal
Yes.
in many ways. What about a second question that I had is there's different profiles of athletes, and so there's a ton in the media right now. Very, very different than in the back of the days of when I was racing, when it was how little can you consume to try and prevent, gut distress, fly under the radar, etc. Never more than 60 grams. And now we obviously understand that's debunked, and both with the evolution of products and the type of products, but also we just understand that there is a real benefit to fueling more. But what about the difference between Christian Blumenfeld doing a 7.5 hour Ironman and Jenny and Peter doing a 12, 13, 14, 15 hour Ironman? By definition, those are different events.
Yes.
And they will be at relative to their max output, which objectively are going to be different, but relative, they're going to be operating at a different percentage of that. Is there anything that athletes need to know, whether it's half Ironman, whether it's Ironman, whether you're more middle back of the pack relative to pointy edge? Are the demands different? Is the strategy different?
Yeah, great question. I think to start, what Christian Blumenfeld is doing is not what everyone should do. I think that would probably ruin a lot of races, unfortunately. But when it comes to what an appropriate nutrition strategy is, it's going to be dependent on an athlete's energy expenditure, right? So,
Mhm.
an athlete who is pushing 300 watts an hour, average power per hour, is going to have a much higher expenditure than an athlete who's only pushing 150 watts average power. And so we need to fuel those two athletes differently. And so, when it comes to what's appropriate, it's going to be based off of primarily that is what is their expenditure per hour. And that's going to dictate the amount of fuel that they need to take on per hour. Um, so, from a bike perspective, that's fairly easy to determine, right? We can look at their power
Okay.
output if they do have a power
Wattage.
meter. Yeah. Running, there is a weight component in there to determining what that energy expenditure is, but also speed. So the amount of, you know, distance an athlete is covering also is going to play a factor in what their expenditure is. And so the amount that's going to be appropriate is going to be dependent on those individual factors for each athlete.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And what that, correct me if I'm wrong, the athlete that is doing an Ironman that's, let's make it up, 150, 160 pounds, but pushing 150 watts. So therefore is going to be out on the bike for 7, 8 hours over the course of an Ironman. It's not the game to say, well, just because I can treat myself like a foie gras goose and consume more, that's not necessarily going to yield a performance benefit.
Cor-
Is that a fair enough
Correct.
statement?
It always needs to be in relation to what their expenditure is. So, you know,
Yeah.
an athlete covering the same distance, Christian Blumenfeld might be covering that bike course in what, 4 hours now, something crazy,
Yeah.
crazy fast.
Yeah.
His carb intake per hour is going to be much higher going to be required to be much higher than an athlete that's covering that distance in 8 hours. They may be more appropriate with 60 grams of carb per hour just because the energy expenditure per hour is lower.
Exactly. It's very and for listeners, time and time and time again, the last thing we want to do is mimic the pros because they are the most successful, whether it's training, whether it's we want to build the recipe, pardon the pun, as appropriate to you and your demands. I want to finish up with one last thing that I've been dying to ask you actually, and so I'm glad we have 5 minutes at the end of this just to dig in. I want to talk about race week fueling because this is something that you actually don't hear that much about, and athletes listen to all of this advice, arrives to race week really fit, fresh, most importantly, ready to go. And I guess I'll just ask the two questions up front. What are the common pitfalls that you see for an athlete? What advice can you, avoiding those pitfalls, what advice would you give at the broadest level to help an athlete set up for success to enable potential to transfer into performance from a nutritional standpoint?
I think the thing that I see most frequently is athletes get to race week and they're like, "Oh, it's time to relax and just, go out to eat frequently, maybe, have a couple more drinks than they normally do." It's like they've done all of this work, and so they kind of shut off in those days leading into the race. And that typically can cause problems, right? Just from a GI perspective, maybe increase eating out at restaurants. Maybe you're having some more fats just because they're adding it to all of their dishes than they normally do. That in itself can cause
Yeah.
issues on race day. The second piece that I see really often is athletes not having a plan when it comes to carbohydrate loading. So, for those events that are over 90 minutes, there's absolutely a benefit from loading up on carbs in that 48 hours prior to the race. But if you're doing it without a strategy, how who knows how effective that's going to be, right? If you're not taking account of how much you're consuming and when, that can cause a lot of problems for folks. And so it's really taking advantage of that opportunity to load up effectively so you're getting that benefit on race day. um, the other thing that I always like to tell athletes is, whenever you get to a race location, so let's say you're traveling, uh, number one stop when you get there. Well, first, I'll back up. Look at your accommodation, see where you're staying.
Mm.
Do you have access to a fridge if you're in a hotel room? Or do you have access to a microwave? Like knowing the cooking equipment that you have will allow you to make good choices. And then going to the grocery store and getting options that you can rely on so that you're not having to constantly search for them throughout the week. And what I tell athletes is this should be the number one priority. Like, I know that you've just gotten your bike off of the airplane and you want to build it, but if you run into bike issues, you don't want to be hangry while trying to fix those bike issues. Like, that's not going to be that's not going to go well. So like grocery store number one before you do anything else when you get to your race location. Um, and just I think it's I think it's taking some control so that you are not, you know, just a slave to your situation, is you have the autonomy to make good choices when it comes to nutrition for race weekend, especially those 2 days leading into a race.
Which is terrific. Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, Megan, I can't tell you how thankful I am that you took the time out to join us on the show, and I'm going to do the fun part here, which is for listeners. I think it's clear that treating your nutrition with the same level of importance as your key workouts is a catalyst to improve not just your enjoyment in the sport, not just your health, but also your performance ultimately. And I know that education is absolutely central for you, for Scott and the whole team at Fuelin. This isn't just an advertorial for people to sign up for Fuelin, but we're massive fans of Fuelin, and so I'm going to do this job for you. And I'm going to encourage listeners that if you listen today and you realize that you might benefit from some individual help, there is nowhere else to go. There's a reason that fueling is the leading endurance sports solution for athletes of all levels, from world champions all the way down to newcomers. Completely personalized nutrition plans. We managed to dig into it a little bit today because I think it's really important for folks to understand that this is not a PDF static nutrition plan. It is education, it is a framework, it is guidelines, and it's really empowering. And it's such a wonderful system. And so you can explore more about the program at fuelin.com. That's FUELIN.com. You can email info@fuelin.com. And you also have Purple Patch for support. If you want to reach out to us, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We have a great partnership with you as a team. We're so thankful that you spend time out of your day to invest and educate our athletes. And now you've been a part of the Purple Patch podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. We really had a great time, and it was invaluable advice. And my last thing is, would you please come back? Can we dig in again?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so many different areas of nutrition that we still haven't covered yet. So there'll be time for more.
Fantastic. And last thing, guys, as ever, if you want to reach out to us for a complimentary consultation and needs assessment across any Purple Patch program, if you want to ask us about Fuelin, we're happy to discuss there. You just reach out to us at info@purplepatchfitness.com. We'll set up a consultation for you, or you can head to the website, purplepatchfitness.com/coaching consult, and you can directly link there. It's complimentary, and you have a coaching consultation on us. All right, Megan, thank you so much, and we will see you very shortly. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Guys, thanks so much for joining, and thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the new format. You can never miss an episode by simply subscribing. Head to the Purple Patch channel of YouTube, and you will find it there, and you could subscribe. Of course, I'd like to ask you, if you will subscribe, also share it with your friends, and it's really helpful if you leave a nice positive review in the comments. Now, any questions that you have, let me know. Feel free to add a comment, and I will try my best to respond and support you on your performance journey. And in fact, as we commence this video podcast experience, if you have any feedback at all, as mentioned earlier in the show, we would love your help in helping us to improve. Simply email us at info@purplepatchfitness.com or leave it in the comments of the show at the Purple Patch page, and we will get you dialed in. We'd love constructive feedback. We are in a growth mindset, as we like to call it. And so feel free to share with your friends. But as I said, let's build this together. Let's make it something special. It's really fun. We're really trying hard to make it a special experience, and we want to welcome you into the Purple Patch community. With that, I hope you have a great week. Stay healthy, have fun, keep smiling, doing whatever you do. Take care.